These are the cars that I remember as a little kid seeing in bookstores, seeing in magazines, and being blown away. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to these cars. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas. Supercars are everywhere now. Luxury cars are common. Think about how many luxury cars there are. There are so many luxury cars out there. It's crazy. Cars with six-figure price tags are becoming very common. The kids today really haven't experienced supercars. When I say the kids today, I mean Gen Z and up. Obviously, Gen A is still very young. I'm late Gen X, born in '78, and the Millennials, we were the ones that really experienced supercars the way they were intended to be experienced. But what I mean by that is you would never ever see them. Today you can see supercars on the internet. You can see them on social media. We're bombarded by them. They're at every cars and coffee show around the country, and cars and coffee shows are practically every week of the year now. Practically every week of the year, you can go to a car event or a car show. There's new car museums popping up all the time. We didn't have this stuff in the 80s and in the 90s, man. We didn't have it at all. I was born in '78. I didn't see my first supercar in person until the 1990s. Not at all. Not one. And the first time I saw one, it was a Ferrari Testarossa. It was on the interstate and it was going in the opposite direction. So there's no way I would have been able to turn around and see the car or convince my buddy who was driving that didn't care about supercars to turn around and follow it. Then I remember seeing a Countach in the 90s for the first time. But you know, the car that really blew me away was when I saw a Ferrari F355 back in the mid-90s in Baltimore, Fells Point area. I hung out around this car, was hoping the owner would come out for about 15 minutes, just in awe. It was perfect, beautiful, just unreal, man. And that's an entry-level Ferrari we're talking about at the time, an entry-level Ferrari. And I'm not saying that all the modern supercars, the latest supercars, aren't worth looking at, aren't worth checking out. I'm not saying that at all. And it is pretty amazing that there's so many of them now. If we go back to the 1960s, you had the Ferrari 250 GTO, the legendary 250 GTO. You had the Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale, and you had the Lamborghini Miura. And they only made a handful of these cars. Those cars are arguably your original supercars. And believe it or not, there was a time later in the 80s where Lamborghini Miuras were considered trash. People were giving them away. Somebody gave Jay Leno his Miura, I want to say in the 80s, or maybe it was the early 90s. Just gave it to him because it kept breaking down and they didn't know what to do with it. And today they're extremely valuable today, obviously. Then if we move on to the 70s, you had the Porsche 911 Turbo. I know some of you are going to say that's not a supercar, but for the sake of argument, we're going to consider it a supercar today. The Countach came about, the legendary Lamborghini Countach. It's hard to believe that that car came out in the early 1970s. It's just mind-blowing to me. The Ferrari 365 BB, later the 308 and the 512 BB. De Tomaso Pantera, for the first time you had an American power plant, the Ford 351 Cleveland with the Italian design. Really cool stuff, man, really cool. There was another one, I cannot think of the name of it. I saw it for the first time in Newport, Rhode Island. What is the name of that car? Bizzarini with the 327 Chevy. And I think that may have been late 60s, late 60s as well. Really cool to see that stuff. Very, very rare. I mean, they only made a handful of these cars. Into the 70s, they only made a handful. Moving on to the 80s, obviously the Countach was still around and as popular as ever. The Ferrari Testarossa came about, the Ferrari F40, the Porsche 959. These are the cars that I remember as a little kid seeing in bookstores, seeing in magazines, and being blown away. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to these cars. You didn't have all of these car shows. And the people that had the exotic car shows back then, it was a tight-knit community, and normal people did not have access to them. We would never see these cars, ever. Even a Ferrari 308 was rare to see back then, or a Testarossa. To see any of these cars was extremely rare. You really didn't even see many German cars, many BMWs and Audis compared to what it is like today. I'm telling you, the kids today, have no idea how lucky they are to have access to everything. And I appreciate it as an enthusiast, as someone that's been an enthusiast for this long. I really appreciate it. Moving on to the 90s, when I got my license in 95, you had the Ferrari F50, you had the Lamborghini Diablo, and the legendary McLaren F1. And I tell you, man, cars were just analog. It was analog perfection in those days. Gated manual transmissions, naturally aspirated V12s, naturally aspirated V8s. All of those cars sounded amazing, and they were the fastest cars. If you had a car that could run in 12-second quarter mile, it was fast on the street back then. Very fast. And those cars were truly supercars and truly exotic because we did not have access to them at all. You'll see Lamborghinis, new Ferraris, McLarens at every Cars and Coffee in today's world. And every kid that likes cars has seen all of their dream cars by the time they're like 12 or 13 years old. I didn't see my first dream car until I was old enough to drive. It's just a different world, different era. Moving on to the 2000s, the Ferrari Enzo, the Enzo Ferrari came about. They were moving into F1 style shifters and later dual clutch transmissions. The gated manuals were starting to go away. The Murcielago came about. The Zonda came about, Pagani came around, Koenigsegg was coming around, and the Bugatti Veyron, which was probably the last true supercar or hypercar. And the reason I say that is, it's the first car to have a $1 million price tag. A $1 million price tag. There are so many cars for sale now that are over $1 million. It's wild how many cars are for sale for over $1 million. I mean, it's just crazy. There are thousands of cars, thousands and thousands of cars with multiple six-figure price tags. Literally thousands of cars today for sale with multiple six-figure price tags. Think about that for a second. That's wild, man. That is wild. So if you're Gen X like me and you were a kid in the 80s, what was the first supercar that you saw in person? Are supercars really super if you can see them, if you have access to them? If every random scammer on social media has a supercar or access to one? Not only are these cars all over social media, all over the internet, at car shows every weekend, in museums. You can rent exotic cars from rental services. You can do track days. My point is that they're accessible now. Maybe not for ownership. They're still very, very expensive to own. And some of them, yes, are unattainable and will always be unobtainable. But are they really supercars if they're everywhere? It's not the same as it used to be. Now these cars have giant screens. They're all point-and-shoot cars. These cars are all starting to feel the same. Some would argue that the analog era that I grew up in was the best era for supercars and hypercars. Yeah, you have standard sedans and EVs that are much faster than these cars now. But so what? I mean, speed 0 to 60 is only one part of the equation. Speed is accessible to everyone now. You can get a Model S Plaid, a used Model S Plaid for under 50 grand, and it'll do 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. The coolest thing about supercars in the 80s and in the 90s was that you never ever saw them. You couldn't just pick up your phone and look at them, and that is gone. They're everywhere now. So are they really supercars anymore? I mean, I can't explain to you how cool it was to see a car. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see a supercar in those days. You'd have to stop and check it out. You didn't have a phone camera back then, so you couldn't take pictures. Odds are you didn't have a camera on you. So it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see a car like that. And I'm glad I got to experience that. And look, I love going to the new shows. I'm on social media. I make a lot of car content for Instagram, for a lot of Reels and TikToks. So I can appreciate seeing all the new stuff. But I do miss that era where we could never see them. And it was just so rare to see a supercar. By the mid-2000s, in a way, social media and YouTube killed the allure of the supercar. In the 90s, rappers were starting to rent supercars for their videos. And in today's world, all the social media grifters have taken a page from that playbook, and they rent their cars. Some of them buy their cars, and then they sell their courses, and they use their materialism to make themselves richer. And it works for some of them, but it's taken away from the allure of the supercar. It's given the supercar somewhat of a bad image. I mean, for those of us that are true car geeks that are obsessed with these cars, don't care about driving them to a nightclub or being seen in them. We just, even if you or I were the last person on earth, we would still want that supercar just as much for ourselves. Or we wouldn't want the car to convey status, you know, or clout or any of that nonsense. We want it for all the nerdy and geeky stuff, and for the same reasons that we wanted these cars when we were little kids and we saw them for the first time. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you next time.